Hey, welcome to Heart of the Shepherd, where we help you live a transformational life and lead transformational ministries. I'm your host, Caleb Trinkman, and I'm here with my dad, Rob, and we've been taking a deep dive into John 13 to 17, and we've been looking at 6 temptations and 6 antidotes that Jesus gives us. But, Dad, we're wrapping up today. What are we looking at?
Yeah, well, today we're looking at the rest of the story in John 21. And I have to say, I have a lot, but this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I love what goes on here in John 21. You're probably familiar with it, but first let me set it up. Jesus' disciples have had a rough go of it since John 13 to 17. They've given in to almost all of these 6 temptations that we've identified. James and John, our poster children for idolatry of power and glory, our first temptation, the ones who said, "Can we be first in the kingdom, Jesus?" They're hiding in a room with everyone else. In fact, all of the disciples are hiding in a room, afraid. You remember, we talked about insecurity, independence, inaction, implosion. They've checked off each one of those. Cut off from Jesus, they're afraid, they're alone, they're immobilized.
It's kind of sad what they've become, frankly.
It's not a good look.
No, it's like, you can go to a pretty good dang university, learn theology, be as practical as you can, but they've spent 3 years with Jesus. Like, it doesn't get much better than that. But then you think of Peter.
Poor Peter.
Peter's one of Jesus' favorites. He was top of the class, but then he denies Jesus 3 times and is confronted by a servant girl. Like, it's one thing if it's Pilate or some important guy. It's just the servant girl. But then I think the worst part is when Jesus looks at him. And then he obviously goes and weeps, and it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, here's Peter, who claimed, if everyone else falls away, I won't. And he falls flat on his face. And here we are now at the beginning of John 21. They've known for a while that Jesus is alive. He's appeared to him multiple times. But evidently, Peter and Jesus haven't talked yet. They haven't resolved this. And so there's still this major elephant in the room, this big oops that hasn't been solved.
And he's gone back to fishing as well, though, hasn't he? He's gone back to his old life, gone to doing the same old thing. He's definitely not fishing for men, is he?
No, that's it, right? Jesus had said, leave the nets, I'll make you fishers of men. And now Peter seems to have given up on that. It's like his career as a shepherd is over. And, Caleb, I think most of us identify with at least one part of Peter's story. Maybe you or I or someone identifies with the Peter in the upper room. You feel confident, sure of your relationship with Jesus, ready to take the world by storm. If that's you, today's story is for you. Maybe you identify with Peter after he's messed up big time, and you look in the rearview mirror. You've got high definition failure in the rearview mirror. If so, today's story is for you too. And maybe you identify with the Peter that's in the boat right now. You've just said you've given up. You've kind of pulled out of the game. You've put yourself on the bench. Somebody else can do the ministry. Somebody else can share Christ with their neighbor. I'm clearly not the person. If you're at that spot, you just want to give up, or you have given up, today's story is for you.
I think you think about him going back to fishing and stuff, and you just feel bad for the guy because he's failed as a disciple. And that's, you can't really fail deeper than that. You can, but it's hard to. And then he goes and he thinks he's going to go do something that he's good at. Maybe get a bit of a confidence boost, get back in the game, get his head right.
I know fishing.
Yeah, and he sucks at that as well. So guy's pretty much hit rock bottom.
Yeah, they go all night and they don't catch anything. And this isn't the main point of the story, but I think this is just like God. Like, God thwarts us in our efforts to be independent from him. And so this probably doesn't feel like kindness to Peter, and it often doesn't feel like kindness to us when we try to do something that's outside of God's plan, and he causes us to fail at it as a kindness to us. But it doesn't feel like kindness. Lord, why am I failing? Why don't you make me successful? But it makes me think of Psalm 23, where it says, the Lord is our shepherd. He guides us in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He uses his rod. He uses his staff to keep us on those paths of righteousness. And when we get off course, he comes along and he thwarts our efforts to become independent from him. And that's, I think, what he's doing to Peter here.
Yeah, you just feel bad for the guy. But I was reading the passage, and I think you pointed this out to me earlier today, but I think what's really interesting is that he doesn't catch anything when Jesus isn't there. But as soon as Jesus comes, he catches a massive fish. Like, I can't remember how much.
153, John tells us, which you can tell John's a fisherman, right? Like the detail here. He wants everybody to know exactly how many big fish there were. It's not a round number, 153, which is great. I love these details in the Bible. John's the same one, by the way, who lets us know that he outran Peter to the tomb. So there's these certain details in John that give us a sense of John really wrote this. He really cares. And this is one of those details, 153 fish. But of course, the real story here is Peter. He and Jesus have unresolved business. He's been caught in his sin. He said it wouldn't happen. He had high definition failure. Jesus turned and looked at him. Peter went out and wept bitterly. And now John is going to tell him it's the Lord. And what's Peter going to do? Is he going to hide? Is he going to hang back? Kind of keep the other disciples between him and Jesus? This is often what we do when we fail, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, let's read John 21 verses 7 to 8, and I think I have it here actually. Therefore, that disciples whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sand. But the other disciples came into the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. He jumps into the water and swims 100 yards straight to Jesus. He throws himself on Jesus' mercy. I mean, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean, you have to swim to Jesus. You have to go straight to him.
Yeah, perhaps for the first time in his life, Peter is humbled, right? I mean, we go through the Gospels, and Peter's always the guy. He's quick to answer, quick to take charge, quick to brag and boast, quick to even tell Jesus what to do. Remember, he's the one that pulls Jesus to the side and goes, "Hey, bad idea, good idea." And Jesus goes, "Hey, Peter, come on. You're acting like Satan here. Don't tell me what to do." And now he has fallen flat on his face. But it's complicated, isn't it? I mean, he tried. Remember when the guards came, Peter's the one who pulls out his sword, aims for the middle of the guy's head. He's a fisherman, not a swordsman, so he cuts the guy's ear off instead. And then Jesus says, "Put away your sword, Peter." And it's like in that moment, Peter doesn't know what to do. Because he's tried to stand for Jesus. Jesus has told him, "Not that way, Peter." And now Peter doesn't know what to do. But he still doesn't give up. Unlike the other disciples, or at least most of them, he follows Jesus to the trial. John gets him inside, and then there's the servant girl, there's the three questions, the three denials. And as you pointed out before, Caleb, it's not a tentative denial. I mean, he swears by his denial. He calls down oaths. I've never met the guy. Jesus looks, Peter weeps bitterly, and it's all captured in the best-selling book of all time. Talk about failure.
And you think of a lot of, like, you read missionary books, and it doesn't really list any of their failures. Yeah. I mean, Eric Liddell, those guys, great guys, obviously, right. But if you read his biographies, you're not even going to hear how he lost his cool with his brother or whatever. Like, you're just not going to hear about that. But, I mean, I think it's fair. Didn't Peter co-write the book of Mark?
Yeah, I mean, we think Peter's the source for the book of Mark, which is the first gospel written.
So he clearly, at some level, wants this to be known. And it literally defines his life.
Yeah, it does define his life, but it doesn't define his life in the ways that we might think, right? I mean, Peter becomes the leader of the church. There's so much miraculous power flowing through him that people will take his handkerchiefs and touch other people so that they can be healed. I mean, I can't imagine having this much supernatural power flowing through me. I can't imagine exercising the sort of authority that Peter exercised. But amazingly, Peter stays grounded and I think it's in part because of this. He's forever humbled by this situation. He's broken and restored. And I think this is perhaps the most powerful combination in a person's life, to be broken and restored. And so the question for us is, how does he go from such utter brokenness, ready to give up, to restoration, leadership, impact?
Well, I think, again, we're in John 21, and I think we should look at verse 15 to 17. And obviously, And then this is what it says. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Obviously, 3 questions for 3 denials, but I think this is part of the restoration that Peter gets.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such a famous passage, but think about it for a second. This is not how any of us would have responded to Peter. This is your best friend in your moment of need. He abandons you. At least if it's me, here's my temptation. I'm going, Peter, I can't believe you did that to me. Peter, this was my greatest hour of need, and you abandoned me. Peter, I can never trust you again. You can be my follower, but your leadership days are over. Peter, you need to get help with your denial issue. Accountability, growth process. You go through some steps, and maybe years from now, I can trust you again. But for now, Peter, stay out of ministry for a while. That's my temptation. And instead, Jesus just asks this probing question. Do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these? And in other words, Peter, what do you love most? What do you love most, Peter? These 153 large fish? Your reputation? Your position among the disciples? The family business and a steady stream of income? Safety and security? Your family? Do you love me more than these, Peter? Then feed my sheep. And I think this is the same question God asks us, isn't it? What God wants most from us. Think of Matthew 22. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's not obey. It's not worship. It's not serve, although those are all good words. But it's love. Love's the heartbeat there. 1 John 4:8, which we've talked about before. God is love. And so it makes sense that love is what he wants from us because that's who he is. Or of course, we've looked at John 17 and the love of the Trinity and the Son saying to the Father that the Father has loved him since the creation of the world, and he wants us to love one another in that same way. And then I think of Isaiah 29:13, where God, through the prophet Isaiah, is saying, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. It's this pulsing question in the scripture, do you love me? And the Bible describes life as a war of loves. Isn't that an interesting image? Our lives are ultimately defined by what we love most. Think of 2 Timothy 3, where Paul contrasts lovers of self with lovers of God. Or Jesus says in Luke, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Or Paul says these 3 things remain, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And then back to Jesus. Jesus says love is divisive. It makes us choose. We can't serve 2 masters. We'll hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one or despise the other. It's a war of loves. And the Bible tells us desire determines direction. Direction determines destiny. Desire determines direction. Direction determines destiny. There's a war of loves inside us. And what we love most defines our life.
Let me just push back to what you said to begin with. It sounded just a little bit like a little bit of like it sounds like I don't know how you put it. I guess basically I do these things and through doing these things I show I love God. Like a little bit works-based righteousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and also I think sometimes we get talking about God's love, and the other thing we can fall into is that God can seem a bit needy, like this kind of despot king who needs our love and our affection. And so I think that's a really key pushback. And you're right. Obviously, John 13-17 that we've just been in, Jesus repeatedly says that love and obedience go together. At John 14, verse 15, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. But I think the thing that's so key for us to understand there is that verse, John 14:15, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, that's a one-way street. Obedience is the result of love. So he's not saying, if you keep my commandments, it proves that you love me. Or you should go keep my commandments to prove that you love me. He's saying, no, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. But it doesn't necessarily mean that those who keep his commandments love him. Those are called Pharisees. They keep the commandments, but it's not out of love. Love to obedience is a one-way street. But I think even more importantly than that is to ask the question, where does this love come from? So 1 John 4:19, that classic verse, we love because he first loved us. Jesus doesn't ask Peter if he loves him because Jesus is some sort of power-hungry king demanding the love of his subjects, nor is he this weak and needy God, like needing, please, Peter, love me. As we've seen in John 17, Jesus already experiences perfect and total relationship with the Father. He doesn't need Peter's love. He doesn't need our love. He simply wants us to share love with him. And so he invites us into that loving relationship that he shares with the Father. He loves us first, and he invites us to enjoy loving him in return. This isn't an invitation just to obedience or an invitation to a slave who honors his king. This is an invitation to relationship, an invitation to fellowship and communion. We get to be receivers and responders to God's love and then share this love with the world. I think we see this in 1 John chapter 3, where it says, how great is the love the Father has lavished on us that we get to be called children of God. That's our identity. Or in Ephesians 1 and Ephesians 3 and Romans 8, where it says we're adopted as sons. And the reason Paul uses sons there and not sons and daughters is because he wants us to get the connection that we're adopted as sons to be co-heirs with the Son, which is a jaw-dropping truth. In some crazy way, God doesn't just offer us status as slaves or servants or subjects in his kingdom. Jesus calls us brothers and sisters. The Father calls us sons and daughters. In some crazy way, we're royal. He gives us value as dearly beloved children. We're loved by the High King of Heaven. The God of the angel armies welcomes us into his family. We're invited to participate in the relationship the Father shares with the Son. And the reason I wanted to finish with this passage for this study on the heart of the shepherd, even though it's out of John 13-17, is it's kind of this is the rest of the story. This is the rest of the story. After the colossal failures, after they've given in to temptation after temptation after temptation, Jesus comes along and he asks the most fundamental question. Peter, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. And this is the heart of a shepherd. Love Jesus and feed his sheep. So if you're listening today and you're like Peter before his denial, you're full of confidence, full of faith, you're ready to take on the world for Jesus, just make sure you love Jesus and feed his sheep. And if you're listening and you're like Peter after his denial, you're broken, you're full of shame and guilt, do what Caleb said, get out of that boat, swim 100 yards straight to Jesus, fall at his feet, be reconciled, and he's going to ask you one question. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. And if you're listening and you're like Peter in the boat, you've given up on being used by God. You've stepped away from joining him on mission and gone back to your old life because you just can't make it and you've given up. He'd say the same thing to you. Love Jesus and feed his sheep. As we said earlier, often the best Christian ministers are those who have been broken and restored, just like Peter. This is the heart of a shepherd.
I think then the key question is, how do we, because obviously we need to draw to Jesus whenever we, sin and repent, but how do we do that on a regular basis? How do we do that specifically this week?
Yeah, how can we receive and respond to his love this week and then share it with others? I think we know the answer, but we so often miss it, don't we? Draw near to him in his word this week. If anybody gives you new answers on this, we should be desperately suspicious. It's the old things that are the rich things. It's what John says in the book of Revelation, return to your first love. the way in which you loved at first. Draw near to Jesus. Draw near to the living word through the written word. Soak in his love for you this week. And then orient your life, align your life to that love. Our life's direction is determined by this war of loves that's in our heart. And Jesus loves us first, and he invites us to respond in love to him. That's the good news. It's not go work really hard. It's not go do this on your own. It's, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Do you love me? Then be a shepherd. That's the heart of a shepherd.
Well, that's it for Heart of the Shepherd. Thank you so much for joining us and watching it. If you found it helpful, then please do share it with other people and comment in the YouTube section below, and to give us some feedback. We love your encouragement and your constructive criticism. We are starting a new series next week called 6 Moves That Can Change the World. So do you have anything on that? Or
Yeah, very excited about this. Several years ago, I spent about 6 months in the book of Acts asking the question, what are the things that they did that we often don't do, or the things that they did that we don't do enough of? And we're going to look at 6 things that characterized the early church that often don't characterize enough. These are powerful truths, powerful stories. I absolutely love this material. Can't wait to have you come along with us for the ride on 6 moves that can change the world.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Please share this with others. We'd love to have this bless as many people as possible. So hope you have a good rest of your week, and God bless. And
See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks.